Shops were closed down, food bank lines stretching around city blocks, families desperate for a meal. This was the reality of the Great Depression, the worst economic crisis of the modern era, lasting from 1929 until World War II began in 1939. It wasn't just a stock market crash, it was a human story of hardship and resilience that touched nearly everyone. Today, we'll journey through the causes of the Great Depression, the daily struggles of those who lived through it, and how the world eventually found its way out. Our story begins in the Roaring Twenties, a decade of booming prosperity and confidence. The U.S. economy was soaring. Total wealth more than doubled between the years 1920 and 1929. Everyone from millionaire tycoons to cooks and janitors was investing in the stock market, hoping to get rich quick. Stock prices kept climbing to stratospheric levels, far beyond what companies were really worth. But in the autumn of 1929, that illusion of endless wealth shattered. On October 24, 1929, Black Thursday, nervous investors started selling off stocks in a panic. Nearly 13 million shares traded that day. And then came Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929, about 16 million. Shares were dumped on the market amid complete chaos. Stock prices plummeted. Billions of dollars of wealth evaporated in hours. People who had bought stocks with borrowed money were wiped out completely. In the blink of an eye, confidence in the economy vanished. Companies that had seen themselves invincible found themselves with warehouses full of unsold goods. As panic spread, factories slashed production and started laying off workers. Those who kept their jobs saw their wages cut and their buying power shrank. It was the beginning of a downward spiral. By the early 1930s, the United States was in deep crisis. Unemployment skyrocketed by 1933. Nearly 1 in 4 Americans had no job. With no income, countless families lost their homes and went hungry. Breadlines and soup kitchens sprang up in every city as charities and churches struggled to feed the hungry. Long lines of men, women, and children waited patiently for a bowl of soup or a slice of bread. It became an everyday sight. Homelessness surged. People unable to pay rent or mortgages built makeshift shacks on empty land. Entire shantytowns formed, grimly nicknamed Hoovervilles, after President Herbert Hoover, whom many blamed for the crisis. These were communities of tents and shacks made from scrap wood, metal, and cardboard. Families huddled under whatever shelter they could create. Trying to stay warm with old newspapers they called Hoover blankets. Farmers were hit hard as well. Crop prices collapsed, meaning sometimes it cost more to harvest crops than the crops were worth. In some cases, farmers left produce rotting in the fields, while people elsewhere starved. A heartbreaking paradox. And then nature dealt a cruel blow. Starting in 1930, a severe drought struck the Great Plains. Years of over-farming and drought turned fertile soil to dust. Massive windstorms carried dark clouds of dust across farms from Texas to Nebraska, earning the region a new name, the Dust Bowl. These storms killed crops and livestock and even caused deaths from dust pneumonia. Thousands of desperate farm families abandoned their land, piling into rickety cars and heading west in search of work and hope. They became migrants on the road, famously nicknamed Okies, when they came from Oklahoma, hoping to find jobs in places like California's orchards. The Dust Bowl migration became an iconic chapter of Depression-era America, captured in photographs of weary mothers and hungry children that still resonate today. The economic collapse also devastated the banking system. In late 1930, the first wave of bank runs hit. Crowds of panicked depositors rushed to their banks, demanding to withdraw their savings in cash. But the banks didn't keep enough cash on hand. They had loaned it out, and as rumors spread, more people pulled money out. One wave of bank failures led to another. By early 1933, thousands of banks had closed their doors. In fact, roughly 1/5 of all U.S. banks in operation in 1930 had failed by the next 3 years. Millions of ordinary people saw their life savings vanish when their banks went under. President Herbert Hoover, who took office in 1929, just before the crash, was overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster. Hoover believed the economy would sort itself out and that direct government aid might do more harm than good. His administration did take some measures, for example, lending money to failing banks and businesses hoping to spur recovery, but these steps were too limited to stop the bleeding. As unemployment and hunger grew, many Americans grew frustrated with Hoover's cautious approach. In 1932, at the peak of the crisis, Americans voted for change. That fall, with 15 million people, about 1/4 of the workforce, unemployed, Franklin D. Roosevelt won a landslide election victory. FDR promised the nation a new deal and a renewed hope. He was charismatic and optimistic, a stark contrast to the grim mood of the country. At his inauguration in March 1933, FDR famously told Americans, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Those words gave people a sense of reassurance during a time of panic. Roosevelt moved quickly. In his first days, he declared a nationwide bank holiday, temporarily closing all banks. This pause allowed the banking system to reset, and only financially sound banks were allowed to reopen, restoring trust. FDR also reached out directly to the public through his fireside chats radio addresses that explained, in plain language, what the government was doing. Hearing the president's calm, confident voice in their living rooms helped restore Americans' confidence. Once the immediate freefall was halted, FDR launched the New Deal, a series of government programs to provide relief, create jobs, and reform the broken economy. During the New Deal, millions of people found work through public projects. For example, the Works Progress Administration hired around 8.5 million Americans between 1935 and 1943 to build roads, bridges, parks, and public buildings. The Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, built dams and power plants, bringing electricity and jobs to some of the poorest parts of the country. Young men joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, planting trees and fighting soil erosion to prevent another Dust Bowl, a New Deal program implied by historical record. The government also set up safeguards to prevent future disasters. It created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, to insure people's bank deposits, so if a bank failed, deposits were guaranteed. And the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, was established to regulate the stock market and curb the kind of reckless speculation that led to the crash. Perhaps the biggest long-term change was the start of America's social safety net. In 1935, the Social Security Act became law, providing Americans with unemployment insurance, disability assistance, and pensions for the elderly. Before the Depression, there was no national system to protect the jobless or retirees. The Great Depression's hardships made the country realize the importance of having such support. By 1933, the economy started to show signs of life. Over the next few years, thanks in part to New Deal programs, the U.S. economy slowly improved from 1933 to 1936. The economy grew about 9% a year on average. Unemployment gradually fell from its peak, and many Americans began to regain hope. However, the recovery was not smooth or complete. In 1937, a setback occurred. A new recession hit, sometimes called the Roosevelt recession, that put the brakes on the recovery. It was a reminder that the Depression wasn't over yet for many families. It's important to note that the Great Depression was not just confined to America, it was a global crisis. The U.S. economic collapse spread worldwide through international trade links and the gold standard currency system in Europe. For example, Germany was hit especially hard. The economic pain and mass unemployment fueled the public anger and helped the rise of extremist politics, including Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime in 1933. Around the world, nations grappled with poverty and political turmoil as they tried to weather the economic storm. By the end of the 1930s, despite some recovery, millions were still struggling. In 1939, World War II broke out in Europe. The war would ironically provide the final boost to pull the U.S. out of the Depression. As the United States ramped up defense manufacturing to support allies even before officially entering the war, factories began hiring again and production surged. When the U.S. entered the war after the Pearl Harbor attack in 1941, the economy shifted into full gear. Factories that once made consumer goods started churning out tanks, airplanes, and ships. Millions of young men were drafted into the military, and millions of others found work in war industries. By 1942, unemployment had fallen below its level in 1929. The Great Depression had finally ended amid the vast mobilization of World War II. The story of the Great Depression is one of the most immense challenges and lasting lessons learned. It was a decade defined by hardship. Stockbrokers and bankers became street peddlers. Once secured, families struggled to survive on charity, and nature's fury compounded economic pain. Yet, it was also a time that forged a new resilience and prompted reforms that still shape our world today. The Depression led to safety nets like Social Security and deposit insurance, and a better understanding that government and society can play a role in protecting people from economic catastrophe. In the end, the Great Depression stands as a powerful reminder of how quickly an economy can collapse and how, with determination and collective effort, a nation can recover. Through breadlines and dust storms, through New Deal work projects, and finally, wartime mobilization, people found ways to endure and overcome. The resilience of those who lived through the Great Depression left a legacy of hope, proving that even in the darkest times we can learn, adapt, and emerge stronger than before.